Hello, everybody. This is Mr. Frazier, and I am recording lesson 3.3 assignment. All right. These are, again, hopefully you understand. Apologize for the cough. These are your notes as well as a practice assignment that you have. I'm hoping you do it with me and take lots of notes on this paper, and you can use this as a notes. All right, so we start with cool as a cucumber. All right, now remember all of the stuff that we're doing on this assessment or assignment is to mimic what you would do on the skill practice and the work that we do in the book. So it starts with shoe sizes vary from country to country. In the USA, the shoe sizes for men are approximated by the equation S equals SF minus 24. This represents a relationship between shoe size, S, and the length of the foot in inches, F. The average man's foot is 11.5 inches long. What is the average man's shoe size? Okay, so here we go. We talk about a problem that's written in what form? This one is written in slope-intercept form, correct. So here we have, this would be our pretend y equals mx plus b. Okay, and in this case it's s equals sf minus 24. And what does that 3 stand for? That is correct. It would be the slope. What does the minus 24 stand for? It's my y-intercept. All right, now, they want to know what the average man's foot is 11.5 inches long. So what's the average man's shoe size? So here we go. We now take out the f, and we'll replace it with 11.5 minus 24 equals the size of the foot. So now is when we actually use our calculator. Okay. And we do 11.5 times 3 minus 24. And we get a shoe size of, correct, 10.5. Hopefully you've already done it and you're checking it right along with me. So that means, and we'd have to write out the answer to the question. The average man's shoe size is 10.5. All right, so understanding that the size of the shoe is not the size of the foot. All right? Here's the equation, and we write out our answer in a complete sentence. Notice I did not write mine in a complete sentence. There's a reason why, and I'll share that with you tomorrow. Okay, B, it says, use the function to determine the y-intercept, state the meaning of the y-intercept in terms of the problem of the situation. Okay, so the y-intercept is minus 24. Now, why is it minus 24? Because we already know that in this form of the equation, this is the y-intercept. Like, how can we show it mathematically? If I want to know what y-intercept is, that means I take the equation and I plug a what in for x. If I want to know what the y-intercept is, I have to plug a 0 in for x. Okay? So I get s equals negative 24. Okay? And what would that mean? If the length of a foot is 0, this shoe size is negative. Does that make any sense? Of course not. You can't have a negative foot size or shoe size. It doesn't exist. Okay? But what does this do? It represents part of the function. We have to understand what answers make sense, which means if this was on a graph, all the answers greater than that are positive would make sense. Any answer that's negative wouldn't make any sense in real life. But it is being able to graph the function. Okay? So you can graph things that don't make sense, but your answers must make sense. All right, so next one says, use the function to determine the x-intercept, and then state the meaning of that. Okay, so our x-intercept is where we turn around, and we take and we put a 0 in for y. Okay. So my shoe size is now 0. Whereas here, my foot size was 0. And of course, that shouldn't make any sense because the only time you'd have a shoe size of 0 is if you didn't have any feet. Then you wouldn't need any shoes. All right, so it's important to understand what makes sense and what does not make sense. So now we're going to solve for the x-intercept. And the x-intercept, okay, so now I got to move this 24 to the other side. Remember, we're trying to separate the variable from the number. And it ends up being positive 24 equals 3f, divide by 3, and I get f equals, correct, 8. All right, and that tells me that the length of the foot in inches when my shoe size is 0. So 0 is going to be the shoe size when a man's foot is 8 inches long. Now most of you should know that that would be children. Okay? So your foot is 8 inches long and the shoe size would be a 0. All right. Which form can most easily be used to determine the slope of this equation? What is the slope of the equation? And what does it mean in terms of the situation of the problem? Okay, so the easiest way to find this is using slope-intercept because they've given us the slope. That's why it's called slope-intercept. In standard form, we don't have the slope in it, but here we have the slope of 3. And that means what? In this equation, what does it mean? That the shoe size will increase with each additional inch in foot length. So it increases by a multiple of 3. All right? So at 9 inches, it's another multiple of 3. It increases as long as the foot increases. If it was negative, that would mean the size decreases as your foot increases. But remember, we're talking about a positive slope. So that means as one increases, the other increases. Right? And this has absolutely nothing to do with the number. It's the fact that it's positive. Positive 3, positive 8, positive 1/2, positive 2. Okay, so it's important to understand that as one gets bigger, the other also gets bigger. All right? So now we move to question number 2. Question number 2 says, the boxes that the shoes come in are often used in other capacities once the shopper has bought the shoes. Sometimes students use boxes to create models by covering the outside of the shoe box with construction paper. In order to cover all the sides, it's helpful to know the perimeter of the box or the distance around the box. Write the equation to solve the perimeter. Okay. And this would be an equation that's on your EOC reference sheet. Yes, you're supposed to remember it. Well, you don't have to remember it, but you should be able to find it. Perimeter is 2 times the length plus 2 times the height, because it's the distance around. That's adding up all the sides. Now, this is what we call a literal equation. Why is this a literal equation? Because it's an equation that is used all the time. In other words, it's not changing. It's something that's used, just like pi r squared, just like length times height, just like 1/2 base times height. These are all forms of literal equations. Okay? Now, is the math done any differently? No. We consider This we have 3 variables in, and this is what we call standard form. Remember, we have 2 rates of change, and we have a total amount. So we can't have 3 missing things. We have to have 2 of those 3 things. And problem 1, it says the length of the box is 12 inches and the width is 8. What's the perimeter? So again, this is plug and chug. The length is 12. And the height is 8. Okay, 2 times 12, 24, plus 8 times 2, which is 16. 16 times 24, or 16 plus 24, I apologize, is 40. So we would write the perimeter of the box is 40. Notice, I'm not writing the words down. This is to check to see who's listening as opposed to who's just writing what I have on here. Okay? So we're making sure we're writing out the sentences. Convert the equation to solve for height. Okay, so that means I need to get the height by itself. Okay, so now again, I need to manipulate the original equation to get height by itself. Now I'm changing the L to a cursive L because I don't want to get confused because my L will look like the number 1. All right, so I'm solving for height. That means I have to get height by itself. That means I have to move everything but the H. So I'd move to L. And the rule is when you move across the equal sign, it changes correct signs. So I have P minus 2L, because it moved over the equal sign, equals 2H. And then the last thing I get rid of is the number next to the variable. Okay? And I get rid of that number. This is a multiplication problem, so I get rid of it by dividing. If it was a division problem, which means it would be that dreaded F word, a fraction, correct, we would multiply by 2. But here, it's multiplying by 2, so we're going to divide the whole problem by 2, which means I'm left with P minus 2L divided by 2 equals H. And here we have an equation for height. Now, is that equation any different than the equation for perimeter? No, we have just manipulated this so that we can find height. They are the same equation, we just moved things around so that all we need is the perimeter and length, and we can find height. We could do the same thing for length, and we would need the perimeter and height, and then we could find length. And then, of course, for perimeter, it's already done for us. So we have changed from point slope, or excuse me, from standard form to point slope. Now, you'd have to separate these things. It would be P over 2 and negative 2L over 2, which would be negative 1. And you would know that that would be a slope of negative 1. All right, so it's important to understand that you can switch back and forth between forms, and we'll talk more about this later. But it is important to be able to move things around. Okay, so let's look at the last question. It says a box has a perimeter of 50 inches and the length of 15. Determine the height. Well, now we're going to plug it into our formula. So it says a perimeter of 50 inches, so P is 50, correct? Minus, it says we have a length of what? 15 inches. And we want to find the height. So, order of operations, what do I do first? This would be 30, right? I do my multiplication first. And I'm left with 50 minus 30. 50 minus 30 is 20. And then the last thing is I do divided by 2. 20 divided by 2 gives me a height of 10. Sorry, there we go. 20 divided by 2 gives me a height of 10. So you have to be able to problem solve and move things around, and you have to be able to solve a problem. Meaning, if they give you all the numbers, order of operations. We multiply first, then we add and subtract. Then we go from top to bottom because it's a fraction. So you do everything up top like it was in parentheses, then you do the bottom. Okay? So you have multiplication, division, addition, subtraction. Up top, do the order of operations. Then you would do the same thing on the bottom, but there's nothing to add or subtract or multiply or divide on the bottom. It's just the number 2. Then you take the top and divide the bottom. Okay. Thank you very much, and work well.